It's my pleasure to introduce Jim Gorman from the New York Times. Jim received his bachelor's in English literature from Princeton in 1971. Since then, he's written for a number of magazines, including The New Yorker, The Atlantic, New York Times Magazine. He's been editor of The New York Times. He's known for his sense of humor, and he's honestly the most chill, famous guy I've ever met. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Gorman. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. I think I'm probably the least famous chill guy you ever met. But, and I wasn't actually editor of the whole New York Times. I want to point that out. I was editor of Science Times, so which is part. It's the most important part of the New York Times. Sex, Flies, and Videotape, Explaining Science in Old and New Media. What I'm basically going to do is tell you a little bit about myself and what a reporter's life is like, explaining science, and then I'll talk about how things have changed. First, we'll do kind of the written deal, written articles, and then a little bit about the video series I do, for which Georgia Tech often provides material. And I'll talk about how those things are put together and some of the ways that it's best, some of the tools that are used in explaining science. So briefly, I've got to use this. I used to edit a technology section, so it's really pathetic that I'm so technologically illiterate. But just to show you how you become a science writer, my first job was there. I worked for a weekly newspaper called the St. John Valley Times, and I don't recall writing anything about science for them, but there were a lot of moose there. It was very far away, so perhaps that's where my interest in animals came from. I later moved to, this is my brain, by the way. I went to the Hartford Courant, the Sciences magazine. I started writing about science because I like the ideas, and I didn't like sort of the combative back and forth. I don't know if you've noticed, but in covering, in sort of a normal kind of journalism, there's often a real adversarial relationship between the press and the people they write about. I mean, not always, but it happens. And I found that kind of combative interaction less to my taste. I liked interviewing scientists about their ideas and what they were trying to do and figure out. They were usually interested in talking to me, and I like talking to them, so that was much better. At the New York Times, I've done a lot of different things. I won't go through the whole list of them, but one thing I did was cover neuroscience, and one of the exciting things, I got to spend about 4 or 5 hours doing various tests in an MRI machine. They didn't come up with any verdict, but they did give me this beautiful picture that I get to show. I've also covered experimentation on animals. I cover a lot of changes in what's been happening with chimpanzees. They've essentially been phased out of biomedical research. I get to travel a little bit to exciting sort of garden spots like this. This is the tundra near Churchill, Manitoba, where there are often a lot of polar bears. So I got to spend quite a few days up there. Somebody has to be with you to carry a gun if you're in polar bear territory, and you walk along through the willow bushes saying things like, "Hey bear, hey bear, hey bear," because presumably if the bears hear you, they'll go away. It requires a certain act of faith to believe that, but I helped shout, "Hey bear." It was kind of, I've never had so much difficulty slogging through, can I get that to go? No, I did that wrong. Get it to play. Oops. Okay. It's the hardest place I've ever walked, let's put it that way. And here's an example of why. This is an extremely good photographer and videographer who was with us. And here he is. This has nothing to do with explaining science to the public. This is just kind of the fun you get to have. Here he is trying to get out of the bog, carrying a very expensive camera. I wrote, it ends well. He does get out. So that's really all you need to know. But I want to show you some of Some of the exciting things you get to do as a science writer. This is in Wyoming, where I was writing about migrations of mule deer, and they have these helicopters, and they go out, they do something called net gunning, which was invented in New Zealand, and somebody shoots a net at mule deer who's running along. Somebody else jumps out of the helicopter. It's like a little rodeo thing. They kind of hog-tie the deer, wrap it up in burlap, and then fly it in a helicopter. And these guys, they flew the helicopters like they were riding dirt bikes or something like that. I didn't get to go up in a helicopter, but the same photographer did. However, when one of the people almost fell out of the helicopter and he kept filming, they got mad at him and they wouldn't let him back in again. So this was actually a great trip. I got to go to Alaska, that's the Brooks Range, with some bee biologists who were looking for Arctic bumblebees. They want to sort of get a baseline as climate change goes on for what, because people haven't studied bees there very much, a little bit, but there is the Arctic bumblebee and there are a few others. And I got to hang out with some very serious scientists. And one of the things is when you go on, so this was the leader of the trip, Dr. Hollis Woodard. When you get to go on trip, you get to know scientists in an informal way. I don't actually have permission from Hollis to use this, but it was in the New York Times anyway. We drove the length of have you ever seen the show Ice Road Truckers, anyone? Okay, so that highway, we drove that highway in the summer. It was sort of dust road truckers. That was our car at the end of it. And then I get to do really important, groundbreaking, earth-shaking stories like about wolf puppies. And I managed to, when I found that I had the chance to go and spend time watching people socialize wolf puppies, I managed to find a scientific reason that this would be a good story, which is the difference between, they're trying to figure out the difference between wolves and dogs. It's one of those same puppies about 8 weeks later. So they were taking their saliva, looking for genetic differences or with genes being turned on and off. So I don't always get to travel. Sometimes I have to sit in my office and, write stories like this one on the phone. And as you can see, I often tend to introduce some humor into it, which I don't think lessens the importance of the science. In fact, I think it gets people interested. These squid are pretty amazing because they live so deep and they see other squid of their species so infrequently that they don't bother to check whether the other squid are male or female, or even if they're the same species necessarily. They just fire out, the males fire out darts of sperm, and they stick in the skin of the other, if they're lucky, if they hit them, and then things take their course from there. So that's another important story I did. Now, the title of the presentation, Sex, Flies, and Videotape, is partly to do with the fact that, we do a lot of fly work. I'll show you some of the flies later. And also, in terms of popularizing science, you look for exciting stories. Sexy stories, often sex. People have an absolutely remarkable appetite for hearing about how animals from spiders to baboons have sex. So, and what they do about it. Now, this story, though, is interesting for a couple of reasons. It was a story about what the alpha males, the sort of social structure in a baboon troop, and who gets mating opportunities. And after I wrote the story, it was about a researcher at Princeton. I ended up teaching a journalism course there, and I brought the researcher in so that the two of us could talk to the students, and I could explain sort of what my agenda was as a journalist. She could talk about what her agenda was as a scientist and how the two merged. Because despite me saying that, I wanted to get into the friendly world of science journalism, where I would be, finding out what scientists are doing and talking about it, the two things don't always converge. We're always looking for a good story, something fun. We're always looking to have a little fun with it. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we get it right. The scientists are always looking for attention for their stories because they want the public to know what they're doing. Scientific information is valuable. It's also, just as it's helpful for a journalist to write good stories, helpful for a scientist to have them covered. So I found out that there was one area in which this story, that was the research paper, this is the story that I wrote. I found there was one area where it turned out I didn't get it right. I checked everything with her, I was very careful, and afterwards, she was, and I told her at the beginning, look, we want to have a little fun at the top, but then we'll get to the serious stuff. I didn't check all my jokes, all the things I was going to throw in, and it turned out there was one area that didn't quite work out. The basic idea here was that the alpha males got almost all the mating opportunities, most of them, and the beta males didn't get so many. But beta males got a few, and they had much lower stress, because the alpha males had to keep guarding females and trying to prevent other people from having mating opportunities, and they had to sort of fend off suitors and challengers. They had a lot to worry about all the time. Whereas the beta males, if the alpha male was distracted or too busy, then they might have mating opportunities. So I started thinking, well, how am I going to tell this and make this fun? And at the time, people were talking about beta males as a kind of alternative in human society. This is not scientific talk, but you've got the alpha males, right? In my day, it was Sean Connery, but I updated this for the younger generations. This guy's probably already too old now for you guys. But anyway, you can tell he's an alpha male because, look, And then there are the beta males, who are the nice guys. They're husband material. The alpha males, they're flings maybe, bad boy. And then the beta males, they take out the garbage. They're very responsible. They pay the mortgage. They do everything just right. So so the joke I made, or the way I described it, was just, to say that if you think of the beta males getting more mating opportunities, then when the alpha males were distracted, it's like the alpha male gets into the fight in the bar, and then the beta male leaves with the alpha male's girlfriend. And while the alpha male is there proving he's an alpha male. Well, it turns out that was sort of okay, but not really correct. In baboon society, beta males are not nicer in any way than alpha males. They're just number two in line. That's all. They're not more responsible. All the stereotypes that I was talking about, the beta male's a nicer guy, nothing. Beta baboons are just number two in the hierarchy. That's all. They share all the same rotten personality, and they are not nice when it comes to mating. So it turned out I was wrong there. What that taught me was that I should probably check a little, even, my sort of asides with scientists before I do it, but also that I think it illuminates kind of a little bit of a disconnect. The scientist wants as much detail as possible. The journalist always wants as good a story as possible. Flies. That was in the old days of the old media, when we would call people up, ask them questions, and write down what they say, and that would be it. Now we call people up like David Hu and ask questions and ask for videotape and maybe send a videographer, and we try to put together something like the series that I do now. I'm the sort of host, narrator, writer of something called Science Take, and these are 2-minute video features in which we try to sort of capture some science in process and use the video format to explain science to people and also to attract people who might not otherwise read about it. I worried at first that this was going to be just dumbing down everything, because 2-minute video, how much can you explain? But in this case, we were able to use the video, and maybe we can show a little bit of it. And if an ad shows up, you can ask questions during the ad, and I can tell you where to book the trip that the ad is for. Oh no, it's a recent survey. So one of the things that the New York Times is interested in is making money, of course, to keep going. And unfortunately, instead of when you read a paper, the ads are there with videos, there's an ad in front of everyone. But this is, we'll play a little bit of this.
This is the lung. This is the sneak attack. And this is what scientists at Caltech call tussling. These are male flies, which are much more aggressive than females. The scientists were recording these battles as they were trying to figure out what it is about males, in particular, what it is in their brains that makes them more aggressive than the females. They used a whole range of tools, from genetics and neuroscience. Here's what they found. Male flies have 3 neurons that females don't. And when one gene on those neurons is tweaked to make it produce more of a substance called tachykinin, the flies get more violent. The degree of control that the scientists had was extraordinary. By fiddling with...
So anyway, there's a case where we used some pretty interesting video. I mean, the goal is something that you haven't seen before. So who has seen, flies tussling like that, leaping on each other? That's immediately attractive. It's fun. It's about sex. They're usually fighting, over mating opportunities. And so it draws people in. But at the same time, we were able to talk about, without getting into the details of explaining it, which is one of the ways that you try and present science to the public, to talk about an incredibly complicated process of research where they identified not only the genes, but the sections in the brain and specific neurons. And one of the things that has surprised me as I've been doing this is that the scientists have generally been impressed and sort of happy with what I was worried was very dumbed down. And they're glad because they're reaching a bigger audience. I think I actually flipped things here. What I was going to say was that the rules that, I sort of try to follow which for anybody here who is a scientist or contemplating being a scientist and you're thinking about communicating with the public, are really pretty simple. The difficulty is in the execution. But the main thing is you think of your audience. Who's your audience? And you have to speak to them in the language that they understand. So you're cutting out technical jargon. Second thing is simplicity. Make it as straightforward as possible. Again, when there's something really complicated, like optogenetics were involved and all sorts of other tools that they used, but we could say in a video it was an incredibly complicated process in order to get to this research. You use metaphors, you compare, for instance, the alpha male to Daniel Craig and the beta male to Peter Parker, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And finally, as I was saying before, you look for a fun angle. So now on to Science Take. I don't know how I got that I got that fly in there in the fly video. That was supposed to come afterwards, but anyway, you saw it. So what do we do when we go to new media and we're writing a story? Well, all of the above, the simplicity of writing, using metaphors, and some shameless hamming it up. I've been doing this now for almost 5 years, and I think that the only reason I have the job of being the person who appears for a couple of seconds in the video is that I'm willing to try anything. So when they ask me to talk in a higher voice or a lower voice or be a little more animated or less animated or do something different and to stand, you have to stand on your mark, don't move your hands too much, look straight at the camera, and be animated. And that was hard for me to learn because I usually walk around and wave my hands and so on. But this one I actually enjoyed. I kind of like snakes. And it wasn't for an actual Science Take. It was for a promo where we went down. I wanted to say, Science Take it's on YouTube. Science Take is fun. If you like science and you're not too squeamish, watch Science Take. Afterwards I thought, so that's a cat, by the way, right there. Can you see the cat and the snake looking at each other? That was some fun. But afterwards I thought, I wonder if it's a good role model for a New York Times reporter who trying to get like a high school, middle school audience to be shown with a constrictor draped around his neck. So don't do it. It's probably not. Well, it worked out fine. It was a very nice snake. In terms of attracting interest with Science Take, we do tend to use animals because people like them, and there's often more video of them. We're very fond of spiders. For one thing, they're really creepy, and creepy works just as well as cute. Again, they have very strange sexual practices, which people love to read about. You know, sometimes the males die and so on and so forth. We love spiders and snakes and rats. This is an example of getting, again, video that showing you something that you haven't seen before. This you have seen before. But, and see me after, I'll give you the rates for this particular hotel. But with the snakes, this is a video about sidewinders and kangaroo rats.
Here, as kangaroo rats go, and no match for a sidewinder. So would seem. Whoa, nice move. Actually, kangaroo rats should have black belts in snake defense. They're so good, they can prevent attacks just by strutting their stuff, like Muhammad Ali doing his famous shuffle. Other animals also show off to predators, like antelopes doing exaggerated jumps. The way to say, I'm too quick for you. To study how these so-called anti-predator displays evolved between rats and snakes, researchers first caught some sidewinders.
So we implant radio transmitters into them. So every night we can then, once we release them, we can go out and track them and find exactly where the snakes are.
They also captured and tagged some kangaroo rats to be able to identify them. Sidewinders are patient, ambushed predators. When things did happen, they happened fast. The rats react in as little as 50 milliseconds. By comparison, Usain Bolt takes 3 times as long to react to the start of the game. The rats also have great physical adaptations to escape. Sensitive ears, the way to hear a snake's good, and strong leg muscles and big feet. You better execute one of those acrobatic leaps. In 40 encounters, snakes struck 23 times. Only once did a snake inject some venom into a rat, and not enough to do it again. Every rat escaped.
That all dogs go to heaven, too. Anyway, that's one of my favorites because what's really exciting about the video, sometimes we get really beautiful video that's wonderful to watch, but to me what's really exciting about that video, similar to the fly video, is that it's something you've never seen before. So it's really, and it's actually something that was part of the process of the research. So I feel like even though we're kind of, enticing the viewer with kind of, intellectual candy, watch this cool video and here's something pretty. We're also offering them a glimpse of what science is like in process. So the people who watch that see what the researchers were seeing. If you read a print story of it or just see a picture, you'll hear about it, but you won't actually see, the snake striking and the rat defending itself or showing off. So, I mean, that I think is one of the ways that Science Take is pretty good. Now, to show you what goes into sort of one of the things that strikes me that most people don't know about sort of science information and science communication is what the stream of information is. I mean, where does it come from? How does it start? How is it finally put together and released? So that's something that I'm going to talk about with a Hummingbird video, which we did recently. These things have gotten all shifted around. See, I was going to mention before the Georgia Tech video, but which we did with David's group. So in any case, I'll just go straight to the Hummingbird. With the Hummingbird, I'll show you a little bit of the Hummingbird video so you get a taste of it. Just click on it? No? So this is a video. Oh, the video that you're about to see a snippet of is about the sort of energy budgets of hummingbirds, and they run on a very tight budget. They use so much energy that they're often like a night's sleep, a long night's sleep. They could die.
Shimmering colors, wings beating up to 80 times a second. But there's a furnace beneath those feathers. This is infrared, a glimpse of a hummingbird's internal heat, metabolism at full burn. When a hummingbird is hovering, with its heart beating more than 1,000 times a minute, it burns more energy, ounce for ounce, than any other bird or mammal. But wait, here's that same bird at night, with its metabolism slowed to a crawl. It's in a state called torpor. Heartbeat and temperature have dropped so low that the bird is using 1/50th of the energy it would use if it were zooming around during the day. Good thing. Otherwise, in 8 hours without...
So, I'll show you the rest of this at the end. But the thing I want to talk about is how this came about. Where did we get the information? So the first step in this is that there was a scientific publication, but the scientific publication was promoted on a site called Eureka Alert, which is where universities and public information people put. I want to get to that folder if I can. Yeah. So in any case, I saw the release on Eureka Alert. I work with a producer. I sent the release to the producer and said, well, what do you think of this video? So he said, okay, the video looks great. Is the story good enough? And in this case, the video was fascinating enough that even though the story was kind of, the actual finding in the end was small, we decided that it was worth it. So the actual discovery here was not, and this is sometimes worries me about what we do with either pictures or videos, and I'll tell you why I've come to terms with it, but the actual finding was that that big hummingbirds are more efficient at energy use than smaller hummingbirds. So that's not such a huge thing. That's not it's not surprising or not surprising to me. I didn't have a thought one way or the other. We probably wouldn't have covered that if we were just thinking, is this news? I mean, if in the old print days, would we have said, okay, we're going to write a whole story and put a fair amount of effort into this, a couple days' work to do that? We would have said no. But since we have video, and the video is terrific, we do. And the argument, in my mind, why I justify this myself is the salary I get. No, the argument is really, well, there is that, but is that you get, video and photos, they have their own information. So they carry a lot of information, again, of what I said before, I think about the process of science. And you'll see things that you wouldn't really imagine that researchers were able to do in this video. In terms of the way they test hummingbirds. And so that in itself seems to me to be worth it. I mean, there is the fact that we're providing, a lot of these things are sort of intellectual excitement, they're sort of entertainment. They're, sort of, I wouldn't call them clickbait, but they're fun. They're things that are interesting to look at. So, I don't know if the slides are going to work for this, but okay. Yeah, I have several that I want to go to. Not first, no. The first one I want to show is sort of after we got the video, after I interviewed the scientists, and I get a transcript of it. But the first thing was, I think this may be, no, that's not it. Do you have a list of them? Yeah. In the folder? All right. Here we go. What I'm trying to find is sort of the first suggestion of how we're going to do the video, where the producer tells me what he wants me to say, and which always irritates me. But this might be it right here. Could this one be it? No, it's not it. That one right there, yeah. Oh, what I'll do is I'll just show you this is the structure of how we, where's your, okay, there it is. This is the structure of how we put together a script. And we go through several, I can't get that. Well, anyway, no, that's sort of the final interview. So if we could look at that one, just one of these. The first one is Hummingbird Structure Doc. That's the one that I'm looking for. Yeah. Well, if we, here we go. So this is the producer's. He's looked through the paper, easy to me, and he's saying, these are the things that he wants to know about, and this is how we could describe it. And if we can go up a little, he's offering me how I should write it, what pictures we might be able to show, what the images are, and so on. And then he's offering some of these wonderful illustrations, which are just placeholders. So my reaction to that was to produce my own version, which he then rewrites and has other suggestions on, and then I rewrite it again. All in all, we go through about 3 or 4 drafts, then he has to put together the video. So what goes into this, and I also interview the scientist and end up doing an article and a Q&A on that. So what I wanted to show, and I didn't kind of organize these as well as I should have, is that there's a lot of work and a lot of back and forth, and it ends up coming out somewhat different than you expected in the end. So I'll show you the rest of the video now, so you can see, yeah, how it turned out.
If it starts with that. No wonder scientists have long studied these birds. Ken Welch, for one, has spent more than a decade figuring out how these birds manage their energy budgets.
I learned to become a bit of a hummingbird whisperer, and eventually I figured out how to think like a hummingbird and how to get them to cooperate.
Here's how their metabolism works. Hummingbirds are much better than most animals at switching between fat and sugar to power their muscles. And since they feed on nectar that is half glucose and half fructose, they've evolved a way to send that fructose directly to their muscles to use. Humans mainly fuel their body through glucose. For us, fructose, as in high fructose corn syrup, goes straight to fat. And even glucose doesn't move to human muscles as quickly. But hummingbirds can essentially mainline that. In 15 minutes, their flight muscles are burning sugars that they have just swallowed. In order to study these birds, Welch has to train them to hover and drink with their head in a mask that measures oxygen use. The mask is a lot like those used on humans, with a slight difference in result.
Their metabolic rate when they're hovering is pound for pound, 10 times what an elite human athlete can achieve.
What Welch and his colleagues have studied recently is how size relates to energy efficiency. Some hummingbirds weigh less than a penny. Some weigh 10 times more, almost a full ounce. As you can see, little birds have to beat their wings a lot faster to hover. And what Welch discovered is that the faster the wing beats, the less efficient the energy use. What does it all mean? Hummingbirds are pure delight, both to the eye and to science.
So the final conclusion there, we had a conclusion that was originally written by the producer, and at the last, and I was not comfortable with it, and at the last minute I was talking to the scientists, and we decided we couldn't use it. And the conclusion that he had, which is this is the limit on their size. This is how small they can get. If they got any smaller, they wouldn't be able to feed themselves. They'd die. But that's not actually necessarily true. There are many reasons for their size. I mean, there are aerodynamic reasons. There are lots of other things. So we went back and forth arguing about it, and at the last minute, we just said, okay, let's just say hummingbirds are great. and that, because we couldn't, get the science wrong. So that really is what I wanted to tell you about, the kind of work I do, and how, and the tools we use to try and explain science to the public, which are basically, sex, cool animals like flies, and videotape. So thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about the times or, yes?
The story about the beta male, which you said you got wrong. How did you correct the story?
Well, the story, I asked the scientist if she thought the story needed to be corrected, and she said no. She thought it was, it was an aside, like imagine, going into a bar, but it wasn't completely wrong. So I talked it over with her, and she said she thought, it was okay the way it was. So we decided not to run a correction. The correction usually has to be something's absolutely wrong. So there's the answer. Yeah. Yeah.
What is your opinion on the late night cable news programs that will take a story, often like a medical report, and then maybe oversell the intensity, the scope, the danger of it to scare the public and get better ratings?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think anytime I don't know specifics, but anytime you're exaggerating sort of the worries, that's a big problem. I think in general, medical reporting, every little increment, often with very small studies, is kind of a problem for, I don't think it serves the public to report. I mean, ideally, if you're conveying information, that's good, but to report every sort of change in how we view the consumption of caffeine or something like that, I think that often the studies are too small, the effects are too small. I think there's a difference actually between reporting on, I joke that my beat is cricket sex, and I think there's actually a difference in terms of if we take a small story that finds a new behavior in crickets and we point out, this is a small study, so it might not be right, but this is kind of cool. I don't think that does harm. I think it shows what scientists do, and the people are able to take it as, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it's kind of interesting. But I think as soon as you talk about people's health, then you're dealing with something completely different, because if you say, maybe this will kill you, maybe it won't, but 12 people who drank pond water turned out to be healthier 3 days later. So,
Hey, so I know you said that you use metaphors to explain science. Do you find there to be too many football metaphors in popular journalism?
yes! Is there anything more that needs to be said? No. Yes, it does. I think they should all be soccer metaphors myself. No. What?
What kind of metaphors are they?
Football. Are there too many football metaphors?
The modern one soccer, but can I ask quite serious, I'm
Sure.
a scientist and
Yes.
I never interacted with glitch up to you or like this. One thing that worries us, and maybe it's totally unfounded because you do amazing service to science community, you in particular, and also New York Times in more general, that you don't actually you misrepresent science in a sense that there's a process to science, and you're just showing gee-whiz stuff and cute stuff, etc., which, is like 0.01% of what science really is. Now, it's an impossible thing to ask it to do, but, that's what worries me, is that the kids who watch this stuff, they think you're making things, you're making devices, and science is not about that at all, in my opinion.
That's certainly a concern, and we try to report on the process when we can. I mean, these videos are one of the things we do about science, and they are the least sort of in-depth. They are the most fun. I mean, we also do, long stories on climate science and the process that goes into studying it. Done stories, well, for instance, I did a story about this is not an earth-shaking topic, but looking at the evolution of dogs, describing the amount of DNA research, how you have to, drill something from a particular bone in the skull, the disagreements over whether bones found in a certain situation and associating with in association with some human artifacts necessarily mean anything. So I think that in some of the longer stories, we do our best to do that. I think that you're right that in the end, we can't represent science the way it is, or we could do better. But I think one of the problems is that I was just talking about this with some people at lunch. If you deliver science in all its detail and complexity to the average person, none of that information reaches them. So they are not informed at all because they didn't hear anything you said. So if you deliver a little tiny bit, you have informed them a little bit. The hope is maybe you pull them in more. If you go into the middle, as many of our longer stories do, and we've done 10,000 word stories on the search for the Higgs boson and how that was done and the process that went into it. So we do our best, but I think that anytime you create a story, a narrative, any story you pick is not the full. It doesn't do it, because stories look for characters, they look for heroes, they look for who was the main person. I cannot figure out how to write an interesting story that people would read about, 20 or 30 people and their daily work in the lab coming up to a final conclusion. So I'm sure, maybe it can be done, but I take your point as very valid. Yeah. No.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I had a couple of questions. First, what do you think your biggest challenge is, or the biggest challenge in science communication is in general? And do you have any advice for students who may be interested in trying to become science communicators?
Well, the biggest challenge seems to me so I've been doing this for more than 40 years, and I think the level of science illiteracy in the country is worse, probably. I mean, I can't, so I don't think that's all my fault. But actually, I wonder, it seems to me that scientists are working harder and harder to, if you look at university websites and foundations, to put out the material, in an understandable way. There are fewer science journalists, but there are more scientists who are writing their own, putting forth their own material, and universities are doing more. And yet, the scientific illiteracy is really bad, and so that seems to me to be the biggest challenge, and I don't know how we can solve that. The challenge in a smaller way is really how to write the more serious stories. I mean, I am a little bit. I'm only one. I mean, the Times is very lucky, so we have about 20 reporters, and we have many freelancers, and I'm kind of the class clown. So you can't take what I do as completely representative of what everybody else does. I mean, I do some serious writing also, and have done. I spent a couple years reporting on neuroscience. But I spent 2 years covering neuroscience and reporting everything in great detail and talking about the process and the difficulty of trying to get a mechanistic understanding of the brain and the various techniques that people were using, both in terms of the technology and trying to even get a little bit of the math. And those stories got very little attention compared to when you run a story of, that's fun and visual. Which is what you were saying, and that is a challenge that I don't know the answer to. I mean, I would say that if you are interested in science communication, there are fewer paying full salary jobs than there used to be, because many organizations have cut down, but there are more opportunities than there ever were because it's easier to do things on the web. I would look for, basically write as much as you can or do as much video as you can. And I don't think the answer will come from people of my generation because like a lot of the people I work with are much more involved in innovative kind of graphics and visual ways to tell stories. And it's possible that they're going to figure out how to both get the attention and convey a lot of information at the same time. So I would try to do as much as you can for whoever you can, and I would definitely not ignore video and audio. We have Andy Revkin here, who's a former reporter for the New York Times, who's one of the pioneers of multimedia using. He was one of the first people to use video, shoot his own video, put up stories, and I would say we still lag behind in terms of things that he's done. Put up a document and allow scientists from different perspectives to comment on the document. I think those are the kind of tools that in the end are going to attract people, and I think young people like Andy, are figuring that out more and more. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hey there. So you were just talking about in this last video that you did that there wasn't much importance behind it. And I watched videos like...
There wasn't much?
You said there wasn't much importance behind it with the article that you had found for it originally. So you lengthened it out to a 2-minute and 40-second video. So I watch videos like this all the time on YouTube, like National Geographic and stuff. Are there certain methods in media that we should be looking for, videos like this, to show them credibility and importance in what they're covering?
Well, I would say see what the sources are. At the end of all our videos, the journal articles and are mentioned, and the scientists are named, and so on. So that's what I would look for. Where did this come from? Where did this information come from? Is that?
Oh yeah, I was talking about I guess when they're doing the video, are we looking for more images that pop up, more figures? Are we looking for more references of articles, or are there certain techniques that they take to kind of ham it up?
Well, as somebody who tries to ham it up, I don't think that necessarily interferes. I think you have to separate out two things. There's the style in which the story is told, and then there's the information that's conveyed. So I think that all you can do is pay attention to the information that's conveyed, actually, and what the source of that information is. And for the other stuff, mostly I think enjoy it. If you're looking for something to see if something has been faked or something like that, then that's a big problem. But in terms of, I think it's just the same way you would read a story. If you read something, you'd see, well, okay, where did that information come from? Do I think that's a credible source? How much of it did they give me?
I've been really impressed by some efforts among the press, most notably Ed Yong at The Atlantic, who's been very purposeful in diversifying their sources. So you might think about the people that you feature as well as the, for example, quoting opportunities. Is there a policy in place or aspirational model formally in place at the New York Times within your division to increase the diversity and representation of the people you feature and quote?
There's not a formal policy, but there's a general desire that the editors have expressed and that the reporters all know about, to not just find white men, old white men, to find women and people of color. So no formal policy, but a
You know the stats off the top of your head?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Yeah.
I take a slightly different tactic.
Uh-huh.
So I look at all the amazing things that nature does, but I then show a design that was inspired by it. For example, the kingfisher, when it dives into the water, it makes no ripple. And the shape of the kingfisher was taken as then the nose cone of the Shinkansen high-speed train, so that when it goes through the tunnel and comes out of the tunnel, that pressure, bang, it no longer occurs. So I think you can show all the beautiful things that you see in nature, but if you give it a design that a human uses, you might pull some other interests. What do you think?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea, and we frequently do talk about that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for every cool bit of animal locomotion or animal design, the end result is this might help people design better robots, so. But yes, we should look for more cool stuff. Yeah. Okay. Yeah?
I presume you have data that shows that many of your readers have been reading the Times and your articles for years, and if that's the case, is it possible to have some longer-term narratives that you follow in certain areas, such as the search for exoplanets or the development of LIGO or CRISPR, and you can just take little pieces in an article one at a time, but over a period of time you've maybe woven a story, a narrative, like an epistolary or a series that becomes interesting in the whole, as well as each piece.
So you're suggesting that we create a different kind of format? Or?
No, I'm presuming that you have articles.
Yes, we do have. We have covered the search for X.
Rather than having long 10-page articles, you just have 10 articles over a 2 or 3 year period that focus on the development and the advances in particular areas.
That's a good thought. We have, the paper has gone back and forth between reporting, having clear beats where we report incremental developments as they occur, or waiting to do big stories. We've done both. It's not codified or, set up in a specific structure like you're suggesting, I think, but it's a good idea.
I'm not quite sure if you have covered this. I was wondering, for all the scientific about 2-minute video, how much effort of the whole team, like say how many people in the team, and how much labor hour in it, and in total maybe how much money you put for this 2-minute video? Right.
So the question is how much effort goes into the 2-minute video. It's basically, from my part of it, it's kind of a half-time job. I spend half of my time working on this. So it's like, it's 2 to 3 days, I would say, for me. And then for the producer, it's 2 to 3 days. So it's roughly a week of work.
How many people in the team?
2. There are other people who are supervising, who look over things. So there are people here and there, but there are essentially 2 people that put it together. And together their work, I'd say each one of these takes about a week.
Is there anything scientists can do writing the original research article, or maybe journals do themselves, to help facilitate communication to the public, or facilitate what you do to communicate findings to the public?
Well, I don't know about the constraints of a scientific article are different, are really so different from what the non-scientific person would read. I don't know what you can do in there. And from what I've heard talking to scientists, they're already constrained often to construct a story in the way they're presenting, depending on the journal. the journals often do essays about their articles, which is, I think, helpful to the general public. But it seems to me that anybody in the technical, who's doing original work in scientific and technical areas should find their own way to reach out to the public. I mean, you don't need to depend on journalists. You have the web, you have video is very easy. I interviewed a microbiologist, Bonnie Bassler, I talked to her quite a bit at Princeton University, and she takes every opportunity possible to go. I mean, she's the chairman of the department there. She's on these various federal, boards and stuff. She'll go and talk at the local library. She'll talk at the local old people's home. In addition to talking at national conferences, she basically does everything she possibly can to present. She'll do a TED Talk, all these things. And so then, there's no reason why scientists shouldn't take control of putting information out there themselves. Admittedly, you have things like the New York Times, which reach a wider audience. But then you see scientists who write books that are just, receive great attention. So I guess that would, I have been talking with David, and there's a program run that I think it's called the Alan Alda Center at Stony Brook University, where they're pushing, and I think this is a great idea, to get like every student who takes advanced work in science or technical fields to have some kind of course about communicating their ideas to non-scientists. And it's not just to the public, it's not just for news coverage, but you have to talk to the people who are getting your grants, you need to talk to whatever other agencies you might be involved with. Just in general, being able to switch your brain to talk to a different audience, and that's the main thing, is how can I frame it for this audience so that they will understand it and I can get my point across. That's all to the good. I think a course like that, and not just writing, because writing is now only one part of it, would be really, really good. Yeah?
Hi, you mentioned literacy rates, scientific literacy rates had been going down. So I was just curious how you can tell that they're going down.
Oh, I actually don't have data for that. It's just surveys that I've seen where people talk about, in other news articles, talk about the number of people who believe in evolution or disbelieve in evolution or other sort of established scientific theories. And I can't cite you chapter and verse, but my impression is that it's decreased. So I could be wrong.
Thanks everyone for coming again.
Thank you.